Hello and welcome. I am thrilled to have two pioneers in the field of positive psychology and coaching with us here today, Robert Biswas-Diener and Christian van Nieuwerburgh. So welcome. So glad that both of you are here.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
I'm delighted, and thanks for inviting us, Louisa. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you for being here. We in Canada are so interested in learning more about radical listening. Now, before I start in with my questions on the book, I just want to introduce both of you. Robert is an internationally renowned researcher and speaker who helped shape the field of positive psychology and coaching. And Christian is an executive coach, professor, and globally recognized thought leader in coaching and positive psychology. So we are thrilled to have you. They have both written a transformative book called Radical Listening: The Art of True Connection. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to delve into what is radical listening, what is it not, and also what are some tools and tips that we can use to help us with the conversations that we're having today. So, Robert, we have always lovingly called you the Indiana Jones of positive psychology, and now you've teamed up with Christian, who is coach on a motorcycle. So tell me how that's so interesting. Tell me how the two of you came together to collaborate on this.
Sure. I quite like that question because it's reminiscent of like an origin story that a superhero would have, only it's a shared origin story. Christian and I, because we're both involved with positive psychology, our orbits often cross typically at conferences. So we, had dinner together. We had some brief conversations. I wouldn't say we were friends, but we were definitely friendly colleagues. And then the pandemic hit. I'm sure everyone remembers 2020 and the pandemic, and March 2020 in particular during the lockdown. And at least for myself, it was a time of great uncertainty, high stress. A lot of my international work and my travel dried up. So I had a lot of free time on my hands. And during this period, Christian and I just thought it would be a good idea to have some regular Zoom meetings just to chat, just to stay connected. We were all feeling a little bit isolated at that time. And because we're both so interested in all things coaching and all things positive psychology, our conversations were so far reaching. We talked about things like what kinds of metaphors would be appropriate or inappropriate to use with a client. And that was probably like a 2-hour conversation. And we were just doing this every single week. And it was so great to have someone who, for me, is so culturally different. Personality is a little bit different than mine. His communication style is a little bit different than mine. And I felt like I was learning so much about a different way of doing the same things that I do. And I think it was sort of that openness to doing things a new way, and that kind of respect for Christian and his approach that ultimately led to both a good collaboration and just this idea that maybe together we have something to say about listening that neither of us would say alone, because it became this emergent property that was sort of the culmination of his approach and my approach.
Oh, I love that. Christian, do you have more to say about that?
Yeah, well, as you said, the chance to work with and learn from Robert, well, what an opportunity. Why would I not jump at that chance? And yeah, I like the idea. I was just thinking, Robert, as you were describing that, which is my perception as well, that we got into kind of a flow states. Certainly when talking about nerdy things like related to coaching and positive psychology. And it was so great to have somebody to bounce ideas off. I could just say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And Robert is great at the positive provocation. So my style is less provocative. I'm more interested in maybe harmony is a bit of a more important thing for me. So I would be able to test ideas out. We built a really kind of safe space for us to throw ideas around and just kind of say, well, I just thought of this. What do you think of it? And Robert has this pretty unique ability to take ideas and turn them into operational, uh, something that you can operationalize. So he'll
Right.
come up with a
Yes.
model, a plan, some kind of structure. So that was what would tend to happen. We'd have a really amazing conversation. And what I mean by flow is I look at my watch and we've been talking for 90 minutes about metaphor. And then my head's buzzing, I've got, really excited. And then probably either 2 hours later or the next morning, they'd be a little two by
A
two
little model.
nice little model. And as we were doing that, I was thinking, and these are things that Robert and I are learning as well. So we were sharing what we're learning
Right.
and learning from the fields of positive psychology and coaching psychology. And I remember even then thinking, that process of generating ideas and then being able to translate them into digestible models. I remember thinking even back then, there might be something here that we could share later. But interestingly, Louisa, that wasn't the intention at the beginning. The intention was just let's talk and let's see what
Yeah.
emerges. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'd like to say to our listeners that this process for me has been a joy from start to finish. Right now with you, Louisa and Robert, joyful that I get to talk about this. But even the coming up with the ideas, the writing of it, the working with the publisher, the thinking of the readers, it's all been joyful effort from start to finish.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And so it sounds like both of you with different styles were able to create something that is even better when you can take differing points of view or just different ways of doing things, and it enhances your thinking. And I think that's a lot about what you talk about in radical listening as well, as being able to listen for better connection, listen for better results as well. But one of the questions I have is, Robert, you've been researching in positive psychology for decades now. How does radical listening advance our understanding of human flourishing, and in what ways does it help us enhance a client-coach relationship or any relationship for that matter?
Those are big questions. I like them. One of the things I'm so interested in positive psychology is sort of what gets invited to the table and what doesn't. So we all know that there are certain topics, grit, happiness, strengths, optimism, that everyone would sort of tip their hat and say, yeah, those are positive psychology topics. And then there's a whole bunch of topics that just get less attention: doing favors for other people, taking initiative, being hospitable. And those are also positive psychology topics, but they're just not the famous ones. And you're less likely to see them presented at conferences, less likely to see research articles in the journals. But there is research out there on these types of things. Listening is one of these. Think about all the books on happiness that you know. I mean, there's so many books on happiness. For as much as we engage in listening, you would think that there would be just as many books on listening. And if you go out and start searching, you're going to find them, but they're almost exclusively going to focus on active listening. And we all know active listening. You check for clarification, you provide summaries of what the person has said, you maintain eye contact, and you ask relevant questions. It's a reasonable start, but I think it's due for an update. It's due for a little more nuance. And I think that's what we were trying to do, is sort of fill a hole within positive psychology, saying that this is important as a topic in general, because it's almost like a meta topic. It's related to so many other topics. And I do believe that there is an element of listening that is all about, as our subtitle says, the art of true connection. And I'll turn it over to Christian because I know he loves that aspect of it. And so he'll speak with more passion than I will about it.
Thank you. I don't know about speaking with more passion, but I do love the topic. And thank you for the question, Louisa, because I would venture to say that radical listening is a positive psychology intervention on the basis that the intention of radical listening is to support the other person to feel seen, valued, and heard. So if that's what the intervention does, and I actually like talking about listening as the intervention. So if that's what the intervention does, then I think by our definition of what a positive psychology intervention is, then radical listening would be that for the person who's being listened to. But I do want to add that I think it's a positive psychology intervention for the listener too. So that's one of the secrets of
Yes.
our radical listening book, is that even though our intention, positive intention, is towards our conversational partner, there's definitely benefits to us. And when we think about what are those benefits, they are to do with the benefits of human beings connecting with one another, being in relationship with one another in the most positive type of relationship, where there's a high mutual respect and high levels of positive regard for one another. So for me, this is a positive psychology topic. And Robert and I obviously have brought quite a bit of coaching psychology expertise and experience because, everyone who's a coach will know that this ability to build rapport quickly, to connect with others, that's a coaching skill as well. So although we've brought knowledge and experience and ideas from these two fields, what's also exciting about our book, Louisa, is that it is for a general audience. And sometimes I feel like it's almost like we want to give away some of the secrets, almost the secrets that coaches know. Coaches understand how powerful it is to match your energy level with the other person. They know how important it is to hold silences. They know how powerful questions are. So it's almost like saying, you don't have to be a coach to apply some of these ways of listening to others that will build these high quality connections.
Yeah, and while I feel that there are a lot of coaching tools in here, I did feel, because I was going to ask that question about who did you write this book for? And you can definitely see that coaches can benefit, but also just anybody who wants to listen better and have a better relationship would benefit from reading the book and have lots of tools. So I don't know, did we answer the question, what exactly is radical listening and how does it differ? I know that we talked a little bit about active listening and how it might be different from that, but what is the difference?
That's a great question. So I think it extends and builds upon active listening in many ways. I'll just choose one aspect of it. Christian, feel free to add. In speaking with Christian, he was really forceful, I think, in saying that you have an intention as a listener. You're trying to accomplish something. So, for example, you might want to listen in order to entertain in a group, right? Like my role is the entertainer. So I'm the one who's going to crack jokes. And that's how I'm approaching this conversation. Or imagine a student in a classroom. I'm listening to learn. Or your friend comes over and they've gone through a breakup. I'm listening to validate or appreciate. And whatever those intentions are, those guide your attention. So you're actually looking at a completely different slice of what would otherwise be the exact same conversation. So people listening to entertain, for example, they're listening for pauses because pauses are where you insert jokes. When your friend goes through a breakup, you're listening for emotions and emotional expression. When you're listening to learn, you're paying attention to keywords, main concepts, links between those concepts and your existing web of knowledge. So it's a very efficient form of listening because your intention guides your attention. And you don't have to think, I'm just this radar dish picking up 100% of the information, but rather I'm attuned to the information most relevant to what I'm trying to accomplish.
Right. And so I'll be honest, I struggled a bit with that because I'm not always listening for with an intention in mind. And so I loved in the book how you said, well, it's not always appropriate to be engaging in this model for every conversation that you're having. And then that made more sense to me. And this idea of being intentional and showing up intentionally changes how you come into the conversation. But I wondered if is it introducing some bias, or am I trying to push the conversation into an expected result by having an intention?
Well, often we do want an expected result, and sometimes the speaker wants an expected result. You could walk in just thinking, I'm just a radar dish. I'm just picking up information. I'm so mindful. I'm so good at noticing. I'm just picking up your facial expression, the themes of what you're saying, the backstory, your motives, your word choice, your pauses, what isn't being said, right? And as I keep listing these things, of course, you're not picking up on all of that. There's no possible way. It's not the way attention works. You're kind of locking onto one thing, you're missing other things. And all we're doing is saying, lean into that. And that doesn't mean that in an entire coaching session, for example, you're just going to have a single intention. I'm only going to learn from the client. Your intention could shift throughout, but you might have a primary intention at one part. I'm just listening to learn about the client here. This often happens, and I'll stay with the coaching example. When we're contracting, when we're setting the agenda, and the client's kind of giving you the story about what's going on for them, I'm typically not listening to solve a problem. I'm not listening to entertain. I'm not listening to challenge or dispute. I can put all of those motives out of my head. I'm listening to learn. I just want to absorb what they're saying, just like what all is going on here. I just want to take it all in. And then I can shift my listening intention later in the session if I want.
Yes. Do you have more to add to that, Christian?
Yes, thank you. I think the other aspect of what's radical about radical listening is that the purpose is about relationship. And it's exactly as you said, Louisa, this isn't for you've got your radical listening all the time, because in fact, it does take effort. Radical listening takes effort. You have to, be in the kind of the right mindset. You have to be interested in the other person. So I think why radical listening and why right now the world does feel divided. We do have a global loneliness epidemic. I think one of the things that's radical is saying that this way of interacting is actually a way of building connection and is the basis for investing in relationships. So I think the radical thing is if we can match the kind of listening we're doing to the kind of listening that's going to be most helpful for our conversational partner, that builds connection. And when we think in that way, Louisa, what I love is every interaction that we have, every interaction is an opportunity for building connection.
Yes.
I think if we're honest with ourselves, that's all of us and the listeners, is sometimes we're letting those opportunities slip by.
Yes.
A relative might get in touch with me and I'm busy with other things, and I just give kind of that very superficial listening. Oh, okay, all right then. Okay, if I'm busy and I don't have time and all of that, but I just want us to be aware that each one of these interactions is a wonderful opportunity. And how do we know then? How do we know when should we be really leaning into these opportunities? And this has kind of emerged since we wrote the book, Louisa. It's becoming clearer to me is that the two situations are one, when that relationship is important to you. And of course, we can include professional relationships in this, but I'm thinking more widely, personal and professional. So if that relationship is one that's important to you, it makes sense to me that we're investing in that relationship. And one way of investing is through radical listening, which shows respect and care for the other person. The other situation, which we may be experiencing right now, kind of globally, is if the way that we're currently interacting with one another is not going to lead us to where we want to be. So that's
Right.
not really led by the, I want this relationship to work. It's just saying, if we carry on the way we're carrying on now, it's not going to take us. You talked about flourishing earlier. How, if we're looking for flourishing societies, flourishing organizations, then the not listening we're doing is
Yeah.
definitely going to get in the way of those kind of flourishing organizations and societies.
Yes. And you talk about this idea of optimal matching. And like I know, you know, when I was talking to my late husband, there are times where I would start in and say, "Oh, I have to tell you about a situation," and he would say, "Well, do you want me to listen just to listen, or do you want me to actually help you solve this problem?" And depending on what I needed at that particular time, I would tell him, you know, what I needed. And it was just a beautiful way of him kind of understanding what is the intention of this conversation and how can I be most helpful.
You're
It's a great thing to be able to communicate or to be able to ask about what is it, what sort of mode of listening do you want? And I think one of the obstacles to listening is that people who are naturally empathic feel like, well, that's always something I should do. Like that's an inherent good, just being compassionate. And it's not. Sometimes someone just wants help moving a piece of furniture. They don't want you to say how sorry you are that they're facing this dilemma and that they can't move it on their own. They're like, roll up your sleeves and grab half of the furniture.
that's right.
And I mean, compassion is often good, but it's not always the thing. And then by contrast, fixing the problem feels often really respectful. Like, why mope about this? Let's do something about it. And yet it can feel preemptive, dismissive, premature because you're not giving someone the validation they need. Like, oh, I'm just sorry that this is a rough patch you're going through. And so I think people on both sides of that coin should realize the limitations of that and be slightly more flexible in their ability to shift between listening intentions.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I really loved this section in the book because it helped me. And, you know, you're talking about acknowledging. How do we acknowledge people? And Robert, you said something there where you said, you know, am I dismissing something? Am I downplaying something for something else? And so I loved, if you can say more about acknowledging, because I think that sometimes because we have a certain bias as we're going into the conversation, thinking the person wants solution, we could be dismissing, just feeling into the emotions or holding space for the person, and maybe that's what they need more than solving. So we could be dismissing and not acknowledging in the right way. But then you also talk about acknowledging in ways that are more uplifting and elevating. I don't know if Christian, if you want to say more about those 7 levels of acknowledgement, because I have highlighted it. I have you know, put a big doggy, you know, mark here, like a so just to come back to this, because it was really, it helped me figure out a certain way that I communicate with someone right now, and I'm thinking, ah, this is brilliant.
Well, thank you, Louisa. First of all, I want to acknowledge your late husband because he sounds like he was a great listener. So
He was really good. Yes.
I just wanted to connect back to that idea of the optimal matching. And when I had said earlier, it's almost like coaches, as coaches, we're sharing some of our secrets. You know, as coaches, contracting is so important, isn't it? And contracting is really about making sure there's a clear understanding about
Mhm.
our respective roles. So I love that example you gave, Louisa, because it shows that we can all do this in our personal lives as well to say, okay, it sounds like we'd like to have a conversation. What would be the most helpful way that I could listen to you? And that's even before we've started matching. It's doing that important thing of saying, I care about the experience you're going to have. Simply asking somebody, how would you like me to listen to you? You're really setting up that a great stage for saying, what you have to say is important, and I want to do my best listening. So I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate that. And yeah, the levels of acknowledgement, Louisa, it's so interesting because this is one of the examples where Robert and I were throwing ideas around. And I think we were talking about this, and Robert was saying, oh, yeah, but there's different ways of acknowledging. Because we were just talking about how important I feel that one of the things human beings need is to be acknowledged in the appropriate way. But you can see that our 7 levels of acknowledgement model takes that core idea and brings a nuance to it, because I still think people need acknowledgement. But then this is about saying, well, what's the right level of acknowledgement for what's been said? So if somebody said, you know, I got through all my emails today, we have to make sure that the level of, you know, I'm not going to be jumping up and saying, well, let's go out and celebrate. I'm inviting you over, you know. So matching again, the level of acknowledgement to whatever happened, that's an important part of it. And more broadly, this is an example of what we're proposing with radical listening, is that in order to do our best listening, in order to actually be respectful of the person we're listening to, we should be more nuanced. We should invest time in learning these techniques and thinking about levels of acknowledgement. So yeah, at the top level is the joining. So that's the
Mhm.
highest level of acknowledgement. And again, since we've published it, Robert and I have had some great conversations about, well, is this always appropriate? But I love it. I love it
Wow.
because if I'm really excited about something and another person joining me would be that they're as excited as I am. They kind of share the joy of whatever it is.
Yes.
So I love that. But there are some dangers to it, which we might come back to. But then the most common one is the affirming. And many of us, especially maybe in North America, I do think that in North America, people are particularly good at affirming and saying, hey, I really appreciate you, or you've done so great. You know, people are generous with positive, encouraging commentary. It's not the
Right.
same in other parts of the world, but
Mm.
that's the affirming is, I would say, we could take that as the standard level of acknowledging. You can go one up, which is the joining,
Right.
or it can be more subtle. And what we upplaying, that's our third level. Upplaying isn't kind of making a big thing about it, but it's just noticing it and acknowledging it. To upplay something would be like, oh wow, so you got that award. Just a little, let's recognize that. Or, oh, so you were the first to, you know, in your family to go to university. Let's just give it a little nudge up. It's an acknowledgement, but it's not a celebration or explicit affirmation. And then we've got what we call flatlining, which I'm really interested in. So flatlining means we don't ignore it. We're not ignoring it, but we're not giving either a positive or a negative response to something. So if somebody says, I've been here 20 years, nobody appreciates the work that I do. It's a real drag to come to work. It's nobody, there's nobody really to talk to about things. And I just need to find ways to make things a bit better for myself. So flatline would be no explicit upplaying of that or dismissing of it. You kind of just sit alongside and allow it. And then you might focus on the bit which is, I want to make things better. So there's positive ways to flatline, and downplaying, I think we can still use it positively in radical listening conversations. It's not giving a lot of weight to something. It's actually reducing the weight of something. So if somebody says, I'm doing my driving test next week and I don't know, I've failed it 7 times, downplaying would be to not refer to the failed 7 times, but really focus on the future, for example. So that's a little bit of explaining the different levels there.
So how would you positively downplay in that particular situation and move the person towards solution?
Yeah, it's to minimize the importance of that experience. So if they said, I failed it 7 times, I'm going in for my 8th, it wouldn't be to say, gosh, 7 times. Wow, that would be
right. Okay, I see.
So you would say something like, oh, so you've had some experience of doing the driving test. It's kind of downplaying the negative implications of it, acknowledging it's been said, but then turning our attention to, so the next exam, what are you going to do for the next driving test? Now, there's 2 that we talk about, dismissing and denouncing.
Yes.
Which we don't recommend in radical listening conversations because they actually diminish the other person. And we never want to do that. So even when we're downplaying, Louisa, we're doing it with positive intention. We want to downplay that because we don't think that's helping the person we're talking to, but we're never trying to dismiss an experience somebody has or even reject. We would not reject somebody's lived experience.
Yes. And I feel when people dismiss my emotions or feelings around something, that I almost feel like I'm not supposed to be feeling that way, or that there's something wrong with me. And luckily I have tools in positive psychology not to sit in that space. But my initial gut reaction to that is, oh, that just doesn't make me feel good when, you're just dismissed.
And Louisa, can I just jump in, Robert? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
You've said something that's so important that might be really relevant for our listeners. So this idea of, we do it. Unfortunately, we do dismiss. So if somebody said, I'm really worried about this, with a very positive intention, sometimes we say, oh, don't worry about it. You shouldn't be worried about that.
Who cares?
They're saying to you, your emotion is not valid or it's not correct.
Exactly.
Interesting, isn't it, that our radical listening is about building connection. And that's an example of breaking or damaging the relationship. And this is Robert's point, so I'll hand over to you, Robert, now. But the idea that sometimes our well-intentioned interventions are actually inadvertently damaging that relationship. Robert, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, I just want to underscore that this is a larger point about positive psychology, not about listening, not about our book, which is one of the things I'm happiest about is that positive psychology is a science, which means it's ever evolving and becoming more sophisticated. And it wasn't that long ago that we were sort of collectively engaged in toxic positivity. That sort of, don't worry, we've got all these tools. You can just be a mindful, grateful, happy person if just you set your mind to it. There would never be a cause for anger or irritation or frustration or boredom or any of those pesky emotions. And we've come a long way in the later revisions of positive psychology. But I do think that sometimes people who are novitiates, right? They're just brand new to positive psych, can kind of get wrapped up in the positivity. And every once in a while, you do still hear that type of well-intentioned but dismissive
Yeah.
kind
Yeah,
kind of idea.
it's not helpful, I find. Okay, now here's another thing that I really want to talk to you about. And I was at a fascinating documentary last night, and it was really interesting. We had this conversation about the level of misinformation that is
Yeah.
plaguing our society today.
Mm.
Now, I'll tell you, and I'll be honest, I find it very difficult to listen to somebody who has a completely different set of facts that I have. And when I know that the facts that they're listing have been debunked by evidence, and or there's no evidence, or it's proven, and I've actually looked into it and there isn't evidence for what they're saying, but it's a popular discourse that, is popular amongst certain groups of people. I find it really hard to listen in those cases. And yet, if I'm not listening, how can I build a bridge with people who just have completely opposite points of view that I do? So, do you have any advice on how we can come together when we are so divided, and even to the point where our facts are completely different?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great and important question. I want to first acknowledge, I mean, this is for people living in Canada, and that this is a pretty fraught time in Canada. There's recently been a major election. There is a lot of uncertainty having to do with your neighbor to the south. I mean, these are the conversations people are having.
Yeah.
And even within Canadian society, this mosaic society, you're going to get loads of different opinions and political orientations. First, you just have to make the decision, do I want to listen to this person? So just because we wrote a book on listening doesn't mean we're like, listening is going to cure every problem in the world. And if only you buy our book and start listening, everything will be solved. You really only have to up the ante on your listening when you want to establish or maintain a relationship with a person.
Okay.
If you don't care about ever seeing the person again, you're really not under any big obligation to listen. But if it's, for example, a family member who just doesn't see eye to eye with you and you care about a long-term relationship with them, then you probably do need to thread that needle somehow. So that's the first part.
Okay.
The second part is intellectual humility. And intellectual humility is a cousin to the humility we all know. Humility in general is sort of not thinking your fundamental worth is better than another's. But intellectual humility is not necessarily thinking that your intellect, your thinking, or your ideas are somehow more worthwhile, which is a tough pill to swallow because it feels more worthwhile. We feel like, I've been thinking about this. It feels true to me. It's aligned with my morals and values. The
Or I
thing,
have the research, right? I've done the research, right?
yeah, I've looked into it. I can substantiate my arguments. The stuff you're saying feels amoral or immoral to me. It's a different set of values. But what you have to realize, if you care about truly listening to the person, is they have every right to come up with an opinion, just like you do. It doesn't mean you have to agree with their opinion. It doesn't even necessarily mean you have to think their opinion is strong in its evidentiary basis. But you do have to acknowledge that they're an adult with decades worth of life experience, wisdom, that they are drawing information from how they feel, from their own moral code, from information that they are getting, some of which is legitimate and some of which may not be legitimate. So we can't just dismiss their right to an opinion, even though we might not like the opinion. In fact, we might downright dislike it. When you shift from the opinion to the person, you can usually listen in a more forgiving way. So, what are you experiencing that's leading you to this opinion? What what is your moral code? What do you deem as value, even if that's different than something that's different from my own values? And I think that it is kind of a more open-hearted way of listening. And this is something I've gained from Christians, very respectful listening, is the idea that everyone is in the middle of something. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they grew up in a different religion than you. Maybe they're going through a divorce. It could be something small. Maybe they just cut their hand opening a can of cat food, as I did right before this call. And it's been kind of irritating me throughout the call, but you don't know that, right? And you're like, oh, maybe Robert was a little short, like maybe he's got a bad personality, but you don't think he's just a cat owner, right? But once you think like everyone is going through something, you're just kind of like, okay, so I want to listen to what you're all about. And I think that can make for better conversations.
That's helpful. That's really helpful to, allow people to have their opinions, and that's their opinion and however they got there. Kristen, were you going to say something to add to that?
Please. I wanted to add to this because this is such a great example of barriers to listening. And we do talk about barriers to listening in our book. And I think it's a barrier that many people will become aware of when I mention it. But that idea of the other person is wrong, that's a huge barrier. So if I go into a conversation thinking, yeah, well, they're wrong and I'm correct, that certainty is definitely an enemy to radical listening. And so it comes back to that idea we mentioned already is if the intention is to build connection, then we can listen to any opinion, because the purpose of this interaction is I'm saying to the other party who may have the opposite opinion to me, that I actually care about having a relationship with you. And we love the idea of radical listening as an initiator. This is how we can break cycles of not listening, by taking the courageous and first step to say, I don't agree with you, but I think you deserve the respect of me listening, and I'm going to respectfully listen to you. And I'm curious. And like Robert said, if we can shift from the topic to I want to listen and find out, your view. How did you come to this? Tell me about you. Because I'm pretty sure, even if it's somebody who has the opposite opinion to me, they don't see themselves as the bad person. Every person is the hero of their own story. So it's almost like I'm going along and saying, look, I'd like to hear your story. But just for those of your listeners who are already turned off this and they're like, no, I really think that the act of listening can start to build that relationship just by listening to them. And I'm not talking about agreeing. Robert just said this. We can even say, I disagree with that point you just made, but tell me more about you and what is it about you. And this is a naive hope, I'm sure, Louisa, but my hope is that if we afford that, and I would consider it a minimal level of respect for another human being, of the respect that they are entitled to have an opinion that's different to mine. My hope is that if I afford them that respect, they're more likely to afford me the similar level of respect. They may not, but it's definitely for me a first step.
Yes. I have a great example of that. And I was teaching in a class and we were talking about the VIA character strengths.
Yes.
And two different people had their character strengths. And one person had honesty in their top 5 character strengths. And another person had honesty in the bottom 5. And the person with with their honesty in the top 5 said, I really don't understand how everyone does not have honesty in their top 5, because isn't that so important to be honest? And, we are socialized to believe that, yes, you should always be honest and tell the truth. And then the person over here with honesty in their bottom five kind of was looking down, and she looked up and she kind of put up her hand and she said, I lived with my mom and dad and my sister, and we didn't have a lot of money. And my sister was very sick for most of her childhood. And my parents had to drive her to a hospital several hours away, and they would leave me behind with the neighbor. And after a while, child services was trying to figure out if this child was being abandoned. She wasn't being abandoned. You know, her parents were doing something very important for her sister, which she agreed was a good thing to be doing. So she didn't feel abandoned. She said, but Louisa, I had to learn how to lie so that they wouldn't take me away and so that my parents would not get in trouble and that my sister could be saved. And she said, and then that lying happened so often for so many years that it became a way of being, when then I would just lie about everything.
Mm.
And when she said that in the class, wow, I mean, the level of understanding, it was such just a profound moment of challenging a norm that we have in society and then having such compassion and understanding for how people could have these different values. So it was, and I think that's exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's a powerful, powerful example. Thanks for sharing that. And and related to that, this is something that I feel like is somewhat under talked about, if that's even a phrase, in positive psychology related to strengths, which is just the idea that we love our own strengths. We've got a bit of egocentric bias. I mean, I've talked to people who have humor top strength. They're super funny. And they'll say things like, yeah, I get that not everyone's funny, but I don't want to hang out with people who aren't funny. I only want to hang out with other funny people. Um, and you can kind of just see, you have so much facility with your own strengths. You see how usable and wonderful they are that you feel like, I wish everyone had these and not those other
Yes.
ones they have.
Right, right. They're not as
And
good as me.
yeah, lucky me that I happen to get, but that happens, lucky me that I happen to be the one that gets the real news. Lucky me that I happen to have the one with the good moral code. Lucky me that I have
Right,
the
right.
whatever. Like I just happen to get all the right stuff and the other people happen to get all the wrong stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's very true. But I think if we are, you talk about intellectual humility and this idea that if we can show up in ways where we say, listen, I don't know what I don't know,
Yeah.
actually. So why don't I just listen with this notion that I don't know what I don't know and have curiosity and compassion, as opposed to judging people right away. And I think I think your book is has so many great tools on how to listen well, how to listen with intention, and how to listen for so many different kinds of intention as well. So I really loved the book. I thought it was fabulous. I think people should go and buy the book. This has been a really rich and eye-opening conversation. As we wrap up, are there any final things that you'd like to say, either Christian or Robert?
Yeah, I'll leave readers with this. I mean, sure, I hope you buy the book. I just really what I hope is you read the book more than that you buy the book. But the book is full of all these illustrations, and I want everyone to know that Christian did the illustrations,
Okay.
and which
Okay.
is very cool. And he did them sort of on his iPad, and to us, they have this very temporary feel. This has to do with intellectual humility. That we came up with 7 levels of acknowledgement, for example.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be 8 levels of acknowledgement or 6 levels of acknowledgement. And that we're open to the idea that we could expand or collapse these or modify them in the
Right.
future and continue. And I learned that part from Christian, this kind of intellectual humility, even about our own ideas and not to hold them somewhat loosely. And so I hope people will just take that away.
Yeah.
Nice.
I also hope that, Robert, and thank you for that acknowledgement. I appreciate it about the drawings anyway. And my thing is just to kind of reiterate how powerful radical listening can be. And in order to do that, I just want listeners to think about a time when they were talking about something and they knew that they weren't being listened to. And I don't like to invite people to that space because I'm sure people are thinking, well, that wasn't a very nice space to be in. We don't feel acknowledged. We don't feel seen. We start to doubt what it is we're saying. We get jumbled in our mind. It knocks our self-confidence. Radical listening is the exact opposite of that. So radical listening is the interaction which builds people's confidence. It's the one where you do feel valued and seen. And so I think in the busy world we're in right now, and again, everybody, thank you for taking time to listen to this because there's just so much going on. But in the busy time that we're in, giving this kind of radical listening to somebody is really, it's going to feel like a gift to them. And
Yeah.
the point I want to make is that radical listening, you don't have to set aside 60 minutes to do it. A 3-minute radical listening session will still feel like a gift. So what I'd like to invite listeners to do is just practice it. Just have a go wherever you can. Just think, in my next interaction, my main purpose for listening is to make this person feel seen, valued, and heard, and just see what kind of reactions you get.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the reminder about how radical listening can help us build relationships and help us connect better with people as the subtitle is all about, the art of true connection. And I always thought that I was a good listener, but this really gave me even more tools, and I think took my listening to an even deeper level and a higher level on how to listen well. And so thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your wonderful tools and strategies and ideas, and for entertaining. And also, thank you for writing the book. We are so appreciative for the work that you're both doing in positive psychology and to help everybody flourish. So thank you so much. And I want to say thank you as well to our listeners. Thanks for listening today.
Yeah. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah.
you. See you next time.